Whether it's intentional or not, over the past few years, Google has been following a tried and true path which was first taken by Apple when it comes to its smartphone endeavours. The Pixel 7 Pro and the iPhone 14 Pro Max are quite similar devices in a lot of ways, but how do they stack up? Well, here's a long overdue look at everything you need to know. So comparing Android to iOS is not always like for like. That said, the differences between the daily experience on Pixel and iPhone is probably about as close as it gets when comparing two fundamentally different software and hardware ecosystems. It's with good reason that the Pixel lineup is often referred to as the iPhone of Android after all. We're less inclined to agree with that statement, but we would agree that for iPhone users making the jump over to this side of things, Google's smartphone lineup provides probably the most seamless transition. And in terms of hardware, it is visually easy to tell this duo apart. Google and Apple's design languages are really quite drastically different. Despite the clear aesthetic differences, the 2022 flagship Pixel and iPhone are quite heavy, hulking handsets, and over that 200-gram weight limit. A premium hardware, glass and metal do dominate here in terms of builds. For the iPhone 14 Pro Max, stainless steel is actually used on the frame, while on the Pixel 7 Pro it has an aluminium chassis, which does make it slightly lighter. The iPhone 14 Pro Max also shares a similar design and familiar aesthetic to the previous models. The iPhone 14 Pro Max shares a familiar aesthetic and design principles with past iPhone hardware. The only major notable differences here, though, are slightly larger camera layouts at the rear, plus the removal of that display notch in favour of a punch hole or dynamic island as it has been styled by Apple. Google reinvented the Pixel series with its camera bar design last year, and the Pixel 7 Pro has a slightly refined version of this design change. It's very different to most smartphones that you can already buy in that it has a distinct line across the back of it. This centrally positioned camera system is really a nice touch in terms of actual usability. It doesn't get in the way. It also means that these two devices, when flat on a table, the iPhone wobbles and the Pixel 7 Pro doesn't, even though it is staggered at an angle. The signature deep purple colour has been all over the internet for the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but the matte frosted glass back panel with glossy side rails is definitely a strong look and something you don't see often on Android. My personal favourite is the space black variant, but it is hard to deny as well that in terms of the Pixel colours this year, they're a little bit lacklustre compared to the colourful options that have been used on devices past. That said though, the hazel colour Pixel 7 Pro is certainly a striking option in its own right with those champagne edges and that soft green colour. It's a shame though that Google did stick with glossy finishes this year. That's not going to matter too much when you throw a case on either phone, but because the Pixel 7 Pro is almost 30 grams lighter than the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the addition of a case is not quite as pronounced over here. Some of that increased mass on the iPhone though is likely due to the usage of stainless steel, which is of course heavier than aluminium. What's interesting is that both of this duo ship with 6.7 inch displays, although it is actually 0.01 inches greater on the Pixel 7 Pro at 6.71 inches, but they're both truly excellent 120Hz AMOLED panels. In many ways, I have to say the iPhone 14 Pro Max has an undoubted edge, both literally and figuratively, as the screen is completely flat. Curved edges do dominate the Pixel 7 Pro, and while Google has reduced these side curves when compared directly to the Pixel 6 Pro from last year, there are some usability drawbacks as a result of that curvature. Visually, these screen curves do look great. In practice though, it's hard to deny that flat screens just work better with gesture-based user interfaces, and that is true here. Apple calls their screen the Super Retina XDR display, but even with this branding, if you care about pure resolution explicitly, the Pixel 7 Pro's higher fidelity QHD Plus screen offers greater pixel density, but this is less pronounced when these phones are actually side by side. There is the inclusion as well of a huge in-screen punch hole on the iPhone that takes away some of that screen real estate, and Apple has rebranded Dynamic Island. It's large and it's sometimes quite a distracting inclusion. That said, it has been integrated well with first-party software and even a growing number of third-party apps like media players and a few more applications too. The Dynamic Island is also home to the impressive and accurate 3D face scanning tech that has been on iPhones since the 10 series. This is certainly more secure than the software-based Face Unlock, which was recently added to the Pixel 7 Pro, but the improved in-display fingerprint scanner does mean that you don't need to look at your phone to securely unlock unless you want to, and that might be a benefit to some people out there. I've got to say maximum brightness levels are similar on paper, but the iPhone 14 Pro Max has a minor bump here over the Pixel 7 Pro. In daylight conditions, I have to say the peak brightness or boosted peak brightness on the iPhone is exponentially better. The always on display implementation though by Apple is frankly quite awful, even with some recent changes, and it just pales in comparison to the all-powerful at-a-glance widget that you'll find on the Pixel 7 Pro in the Pixel launcher and at your lock screen. So over the years, Android and iOS have inched closer together, at least in terms of functions and features. That said, with Android 12, things have become a little bit more pronounced from a visual and identity standpoint than they probably have over the past few years. The iPhone 14 Pro Max is the poster child for Apple's vision of iOS. It's simple, well-defined, and remains familiar, as little has really truly changed since gesture-based navigation was introduced back with the iPhone X in 2017. That could be considered a positive and a negative depending on how you feel about your daily tech. Conversely, Material You has fundamentally changed how Android looks and feels, at least on Pixel phones. Wallpaper-based theming is at the very core of the Pixel 7 Pro. Usability is also at the forefront with a unique functionality or unique functions and features that you'll only find on Pixel. Now playing, at a glance, plus tensor-powered functions like real-time translation and useful camera tools are just the tip of the iceberg here. The often cited Apple ecosystem is obviously the biggest pull of the iPhone series. Services like iMessage, FaceTime and AirDrop are certainly important to many users. That said, Android is actually closing the gap here with RCS in Google Messages for rich SMS messaging, integration with Meet, and even nearby share between Chrome OS and Android phones. Machine learning functionality is where you'll see the most prominent additions on this Pixel this time around though. This is something that is sorely lacking on the iPhone and iOS, despite many of its strong software areas. From an Android user's perspective, the way that iOS does handle customization is a big step forward, but it's still very inhibiting. Another downgrade is in how notifications are managed within iOS. Bundled notifications are really cumbersome, and Android 13 feels light years ahead in this regard. It is true though that notifications arrive faster on the iPhone and on a more consistent basis, but it's not too far behind, all things considered. Without delving into a direct comparison of iOS 16 and Android 13, the two operating systems are both clean and concise. It is true though that the potential update timelines for the duo are actually going to be very different. Apple's support window is not set in stone per se, with past models though often receiving 7 or 8 years of regular updates, we've wagered that you'll probably get at least 5 years of full OS upgrades within its life cycle, so that could take you up to iOS 21. Google will offer years of support for the Pixel 7 series, but this becomes limited after 3 years, so Android 16 is set to be the final OS version offered via official means. Regular monthly security patches are set to be provided for the final 2 years, and if you do want to keep things running on a little bit longer, you may have more fun or more opportunity with custom ROM function. When we start comparing the under-the-hood power at the disposal of each smartphone, it starts to become an absolute no contest. Apple's 4nm based A16 Bionic processor is simply put the best mobile processor available today. While the Tensor G2 processor itself is pretty solid, it's not even the best Android chipset. It's still capable though, and it runs all apps and most games at medium to high settings, but it pales in comparison to Apple's own internally developed processor. RAM management on iOS is also excellent despite the much lower 6GB allocation versus the 12GB found on the Pixel 7 Pro. Credit where it's due, it's hard to deny just how well optimized this system is, and Google really does need to reach or aim for this in future. Although they have closed the gap, there is still a long way to go. Another area in which the Pixel 7 Pro is better, at least on paper, than the iPhone 14 Pro Max is in its battery capacity and the charging capabilities. Where the iPhone lacks though, it makes up for in its inefficiency and power consumption. It could be that the 5000 mAh battery in the Pixel 7 Pro has a slightly high resolution screen to drive and that causes some extra power draw, but it's well known that Android is poor, at least when it comes to power management, than iOS. In our experience, the Pixel 7 Pro is still an all-day phone and it's got solid battery life. The iPhone 14 Pro Max though, despite some decreases over the 13 Pro Max, which was itself a battery beast, is still excellent. With medium to light usage, I think we could easily get 2 days here. A lot of variables are of course at play, and it's hard to deny that Apple is still the market leader even despite apparent lifespan decreases over its predecessor. Charging speeds are officially similar. Despite being rated at 30 watts on the iPhone 14 Pro Max and the Pixel 7 Pro, the actual charging speeds via wire, Lightning or USB-C respectively, is 27 watts versus 23 watts. If you do pick up the new Pixel stand though for the Pixel devices, you get much faster wireless charging times with the Pixel 7 Pro. And the addition of 5-watt reverse wireless charging for your accessories, we think definitely gives the Pixel the edge here. When we move over to the camera systems, the Pixel and the iPhone have some fairly familiar or similar setups, but the major difference is in how they are owned and tuned. The Pixel 7 Pro does not have the latest and greatest camera hardware, but it is finely calibrated and backed with exceptional AI or machine learning algorithms. There's excellent 30x zoom available now on the Pixel, and at all zoom lengths, given the improved Super Res zoom, it gives it the undoubted edge. That's not to say the iPhone 14 Pro Max has bad zoom, which the system though that you prefer will boil down to what style you like. Apple tends to prefer natural, less processed images, and Google tends to skew towards the contrasty, stylized photos with sharp, precise details. Where the Pixel reigns supreme though is in its skin tone exposure. Apple seriously needs to work on this in future, as Google's real-time processing means that everyone gets accurate skin tone exposure in all camera modes on board. Apple ProRAW though offers the ability to tweak and tune images beyond what is capable with conventional RAW images, or at least that's what it's sold as, something that the Pixel 7 Pro does support. But for regular folk, we think this is not necessarily worth the extra hassle and massive file size increases. The Pixel also handles moving subjects far better than any other device on the market, and this is especially important when you want to quickly capture moments that you might otherwise miss. Features like Top Shot also mean that you can pick out the best picture in a bunch in that scenario too. For simple point and shoot smartphone photography, we do really think that the Pixel does excel over the iPhone here. When we start to discuss video and mobile videography though, it starts to become a no contest once again when comparing the Pixel 7 Pro and the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Apple's prowess with video recording means that it's basically unrivaled with ProRes support, no recording limits at 4K 60, and much more. Google has owned and fine-tuned its video recording capabilities with one unique trait that actually lets you switch between all rear camera sensors when recording 4K 60 FPS, something that even the iPhone isn't capable of. So choosing between the Pixel and the iPhone is not going to be difficult for most people out there. If you like iOS, then it's the iPhone 14 Pro Max all the way. If you prefer Android, then the Pixel 7 Pro is one of the best phones that you can buy right now. If you're on the fence, it's a tough choice, and it will depend on what you need from your device. Do you heavily use Apple services or require iMessage access in North America? Then, if that's the case, you probably want to look at the iPhone for simplicity. For the price though, the Pixel 7 Pro offers a lot, given it comes in at around $200 less than the base model iPhone 14 Pro Max. It's the best Pixel to date, with no real compromises across the board. In recent years, the gap between Apple's best and Google's best felt quite pronounced. This year, it's closer than ever, and that definitely bodes well for future releases. If you do want an Android phone, the Pixel 7 Pro makes an excellent case for its selection. That said, you're watching this video posted by an Android-focused page, so you likely have already made your choice. Hopefully though, this has helped clear up some of the differences between this duo of probably the best smartphones out there today, and more importantly, we hope you've enjoyed this video. But until next time, this is Damien with 9to5 Google, and I will speak to you later.